Thank you, Mr Speaker. I move that the House record its deep regret at the passing on the 27th of September 2020 of the Honourable Susan Ryan AO, a former Minister, Senator for the Australian Capital Territory and Human Rights Commissioner, and places on record its appreciation of her distinguished service and tenders its profound sympathy to her family. Mr Speaker, it was Mother Liguri of the Brigidines, I hope I pronounced that correctly, I'm sure I'll be corrected if I haven't, who was possibly the first to grasp the measure and strength of a young Susan Ryan. She said, "Susan Ryan, you are not merely bold as brass, you are brass personified." It was this strength that Susan Ryan drew upon when she entered the Senate in 1975. It's been said she was a trailblazer. True. But it's an easy word to use and not understand what that truly means. For Susan Ryan, it meant being judged daily on her gender, her age, her hair colour, her marital status, her physical size, her clothes, and how she was raising her own children at that time. In her words, the criticism was relentless in the media, community, across this chamber, and within her own party. And that's what she came to fight. Her slogan, "A woman's place is in the Senate," was more than a slogan about one person. It was about a broader change to advantage every Australian woman, whatever their views, whatever their background, whatever their politics. After entering the parliament, Senator Ryan spent 7 years in opposition. During that time, she watched closely Senator Margaret Guilfoyle, the first woman member of Cabinet. Susan Ryan observed that her strength was her intelligence and competence, and she never let a provocation get under her skin. An approach Senator Ryan was determined to take when her time came as the first woman in a Labor cabinet, serving as Minister for Education and Youth Affairs, Minister assisting the Prime Minister on the status of women, and the Special Minister of State. Susan Ryan was the architect of our Sex Discrimination Act, which also made sexual harassment illegal for the first time, and the Affirmative Action Act. Because of her advocacy and the advocacy of others, a woman who wants to buy a house today can go to the bank and get a home loan without needing her husband or father there. Something that today we just assume sometimes has always been the case, but not when she made it a reality. A woman who falls pregnant is not at risk of losing her job. A single mum can sign a lease without the fear of a landlord refusing her because of her marital status. And girls everywhere can go to school and study whatever they want without restrictions. My daughters thank you, Susan Ryan. This was the world that Susan Ryan, and she would say so many others, helped to create, her selfless way. As Education Minister, she was most proud of having put in place policies that lifted the Year 12 retention rate from 1/3 to 2/3. She said that at times her world felt like being a fish on a bicycle, navigating principle and pragmatism. That tension was best grasped in a conversation she had with the late Mick Young. It was at the end of 1979 and Susan Ryan was in hospital after contracting a severe liver disease during a parliamentary visit to Cambodia. She was so ill that a priest was called. Young, a Catholic, inquired about the visit. "Did you make a confession?" "Of course not," she said. "You know I abandoned the faith years ago." Mick Young shook his head. "I would have," he said. "Nothing wrong with having a 2 bob each way." Susan Ryan was not a 2 bob each way politician, and that is what we remember today. We also remember her service as our first ever Age Discrimination Commissioner, and as Disability Discrimination Commissioner also, always advocating that an Australian that used the talents and capacity of its people would be a better and bigger place. Mr Speaker, Susan Ryan once reflected that politics is like diving into a blustery surf, something she spent years doing at Maree Beach. "You don't linger at the edge," she said, "you jump in and fight your way through to the breakers. Finally you get to the still deep water beyond. You see if you can catch a wave and ride it to the shore. Few things in life are as exhilarating. When the wave is finished, it's not the end of the story." Mr Speaker, in fighting through the breakers, Susan Ryan's life reminds us of what what can be achieved in this life, and particularly in this place. Her life helped stir and channel the currents that flow through our country today, and we are indeed grateful. On behalf of the government, I express our heartfelt sympathies to Susan's partner, Rory Sutton, her children Justine and Benedict, and her grandson Amir. May she rest in peace. We thank her for her service.
And I call the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his generous words and for agreeing as well to a state funeral for Susan Ryan. Susan Ryan may have left us, but she does not leave a void. Thanks to the power and the sheer scale of her legacy, her presence is all around us. As the first female Minister for the Status of Women, she became a feminist hero. And of course, when she ran for the Senate, she did indeed run under a woman's place is in the Senate. And there's something appropriate about the condolence motion today being moved on the very day in which, for the first time, a majority of the Senate is female. So a history that she was one of the champions of. But she lives in our hearts as a Labor giant, and even more than that, as a great Australian who had respect across the board. It's not just because of what she did, even though she did so much. It's because what she did lasted. The towering pinnacle of her achievement was the Sex Discrimination Act of 1984, which Susan would later reflect on as, quote, probably the most useful thing I've done in my life. Only Susan could have inserted the word probably into that sentence about such a profound change in the way that our society operates. Until that act, it was legal, entirely, perfectly legal, to discriminate on the basis of sex, marital status or pregnancy. Women were locked out of education, jobs and opportunity. They were refused access to home finance. They faced the sack for being pregnant. It was an immense wrong, but Susan set about the task of righting it. It is sobering to remember that she was up against considerable opposition. No fewer than 26 members of this chamber voted against this legislation, but they were no match for her. Susan's triumph is that her reforms have become part of who we are as a nation, and that what she fought against looks to younger generations like the stuff of dystopian fiction. But it was real, and Susan toppled it. And that's because she was driven, and she arrived in the job prepared and ready to go. It didn't matter what she was up against. If things were hard, she just kept going. Even in opposition, that hard stretch of opposition in the wake of the dismissal, she got on with it. She used that time to develop her policy agenda. She kept her faith in democratic politics. She kept her faith in the power of government to change people's lives for the better. She laid the groundwork for that legislation that would deliver the fatal blow to that farcical, antiquated system. As one of the founders of the Women's Electoral Lobby, not for her sitting outside complaining after decisions were made, she was absolutely determined to be part of a party of government that actually made the decision. She, of course, became part of the extraordinary First Hawke ministry, and she hit the ground running as Labor's first ever female cabinet minister. No dithering, no empty announcements, just action. As well as the Sex Discrimination Act, she was instrumental in the Affirmative Action Equal Opportunities in Employment Act. She understood keenly that most fundamental truth, that education is the greatest source of the opportunity that makes equality possible, the equality we see as core of who we are as a nation. As Education Minister, Susan was responsible for increasing participation in tertiary education and for the explosion in the numbers of Australian children completing school. She was very proud of the fact that she presided over a doubling of the number of girls who finished high school. But she began a process which, when the Hawke government was elected, 3 out of 10 Australians finished high school. In 1996, that figure was 8 out of 10. That is an absolute revolution which she began and deserves credit for. After politics, Susan's driving energies didn't change. Along the way, she was Age Discrimination Commissioner and Disability Discrimination Commissioner. She was a champion of superannuation as well as the Republic. And throughout it all, she mentored young people in our movement, including myself and the member for Sydney and many others. But her light shone with a special brightness for young women, staying true to her first election slogan as she reminded them that a woman's place indeed was not just in the Senate but in the House of Representatives, in the places where decisions are made. I spoke to Susan on the way back from Canberra in the car just a short time ago, it seems. She didn't tell me that she was ill. She had got into contact with me because she wanted to talk about the aged care crisis and she wanted to talk about superannuation, two of her great passions in life. We had a great discussion, as we always did. She was positive, as she always was. She knew how to enjoy life. She was certainly fun to be around, and she wanted to improve the lives of her fellow Australians. Guided by fundamental truths, she did. In her 1999 memoir, Catching the Wave, she wrote, "Women and men should be judged on their merits, not on how far they reinforce some socially useful or commercially contrived norm." As part of a great Labor government, Susan Ryan was pivotal in bringing our nation closer to that reality. Australia is a better country because of her. Susan Ryan achieved historic firsts as the first female senator for the ACT, the first female Labor cabinet minister and the first female minister for women. But in a life dedicated to women's rights and equality, Susan achieved something bigger, that while she was the first, she would never be the last. To her partner Rory and her children Justine and Benedict, we offer our heartfelt condolences. And to Susan, we give you our thanks.
As a mark of respect to the memory of the Honourable Susan Maree Ryan, I ask all present to rise in their places. I thank the House.